Assalamu alaikum. Greetings from Tokyo. I'm Caroline Kenedy, the U.S. Ambassador to Japan. Congratulations to the people of Algeria on celebrating 54 years of independence.
For most people, one heartbreaking loss is enough to change a lifetime. But for Caroline Kenedy, tragedy has returned again and again, beginning when she was just a little girl. Now, after the devastating loss of her daughter, Tatiana Schlossberg, Caroline has finally shared a few emotional words that have touched people around the world. A childhood shattered by assassination. Caroline Kennedy's life changed forever before she was even 6 years old. Born on November 27, 1957, she spent her earliest years inside the White House, while her father, President John F. Kennedy, served as the 35th President of the United States. To the American public, Caroline became a symbol of youth and hope during a new generation of leadership. Photos of her playing in the White House, riding her pony on the South Lawn, or spending time with her parents gave Americans a rare glimpse into the president's family life. Inside the White House, however, Caroline was simply a little girl enjoying time with her parents and younger brother, John F. Kennedy, Jr. She was too young to understand politics or the enormous responsibilities her father carried every day. Her memories were those of birthdays, family dinners, bedtime stories, and moments shared with parents who loved their children deeply. Everything changed on November 22, 1963. President Kennedy was visiting Dallas, Texas, when he was assassinated while riding in a presidential motorcade. Caroline was only 5 years old and just 5 days away from celebrating her 6th birthday. Her younger brother, John Jr., was only 3. In a single afternoon, their lives were completely transformed. Like many young children, Caroline could not fully understand what had happened. She only knew that her father was gone and that the adults around her were overwhelmed with sadness. Her mother, Jacqueline Kenedy, suddenly became a widow at just 34 years old. The family's private grief quickly became a public event, watched by millions of people around the world. The funeral for President Kennedy became one of the most unforgettable moments in American history. Television cameras followed every part of the ceremony as world leaders gathered to honor the fallen president. Images of Caroline walking beside her mother in a white coat and little John Jr. saluting his father's casket became lasting symbols of national mourning. Those photographs have been remembered for generations, but behind those famous images were 2 children experiencing a heartbreaking loss that no child should have to face. For Caroline, growing up after her father's death was unlike anything most people could imagine. She became one of the world's most recognizable grieving children. Everywhere she went, people remembered the little girl from the funeral. Her father's name carried enormous meaning to millions of Americans, and that attention followed Caroline throughout her entire life. Jacqueline Kenedy understood that her children needed as much normalcy as possible. After leaving Washington, she moved the family first to Georgetown and later to New York City. She worked tirelessly to keep photographers at a distance, enrolled Caroline and John in private schools, and tried to create a childhood that was as ordinary as circumstances allowed. She believed her children deserved the chance to grow up without cameras following every step they took. Caroline has often spoken about how important her mother was during those difficult years. Jackie made sure that President Kennedy remained a loving presence in their home through stories, photographs, and family memories. At the same time, Caroline had to grow up knowing that the man she remembered as her father had become much more than that to the rest of the world. To millions of people, John F. Kennedy was a national hero whose legacy would never fade. To Caroline, he was also the father she barely had the chance to know. But as Caroline grew older, more heartbreaking losses were waiting, and each one would test her strength in new ways. Learning to live under the Kennedy name. After the death of President John F. Kennedy, Caroline Kenedy faced a challenge that very few children could understand. She was not only grieving the loss of her father, but she was also growing up under the eyes of an entire nation. Everywhere she went, people recognized her as the daughter of the late president. As she got older, she had to learn how to build her own life while carrying one of the most famous family names in American history. The person who had the greatest influence during these years was her mother, Jacqueline Kenedy. Jackie understood that her children would never have completely normal lives, but she was determined to give them as much stability as possible. She believed that good manners, education, privacy, and family values were more important than public attention. Rather than allowing Caroline to become a celebrity because of her last name, Jackie encouraged her to focus on learning, hard work, and personal character. Jackie also made sure that Caroline remembered her father as more than a historical figure. She shared stories about him, kept family photographs around the house, and spoke about the kind of man he was at home. At the same time, she wanted her daughter to discover her own identity instead of spending her life trying to live up to someone else's achievements. Even with her mother's protection, growing up was not easy. The Kenedy name opened many doors, but it also brought enormous pressure. Every decision Caroline made attracted attention. Reporters followed the family's activities, magazines wrote about them, and people expected members of the Kenedy family to meet incredibly high standards. Many wondered whether Caroline would eventually enter politics, become a public speaker, or seek elected office like so many of her relatives. Instead, she focused on her education. Caroline attended respected private schools before enrolling at Radcliffe College, where she earned a degree in fine arts. She later attended Columbia Law School and became a lawyer. Her educational choices reflected her interest in public service and learning rather than fame. She quietly built her own career without trying to become a constant presence in newspapers or on television. During these years, more family losses reminded her that tragedy had not ended with her father's assassination. In 1969, her grandfather, Joseph P. Kenedy Sr., passed away after years of poor health following a severe stroke. As the family patriarch, he had played a major role in building the Kenedy political dynasty. His death marked the end of another important chapter in the family's history. Several years later, Jackie experienced another personal loss. After marrying Greek shipping businessman Aristotle Onassis in 1968, she found a measure of stability away from American politics and constant media attention. Although Caroline and her brother had mixed feelings about the marriage at first, Onassis provided Jackie with security during a difficult period of her life. When he died in 1975, Jackie faced another painful goodbye, and Caroline watched her mother endure yet another period of grief. As Caroline settled into adulthood, another heartbreaking loss would take away the person who had guided her through every difficult chapter of her life. Losing the woman. For more than 30 years after President John F. Kennedy's assassination, Jacqueline Kenedy Onassis was the steady presence that held her family together. She had guided Caroline Kenedy through childhood, protected her from constant public attention, and taught her how to carry herself with dignity no matter how difficult life became. So when Jackie was diagnosed with cancer in 1994, Caroline knew she was facing one of the hardest moments of her life. In January 1994, Jackie was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a cancer that affects the body's lymphatic system. The diagnosis came as a shock to family and friends. Although she began treatment, the illness moved quickly. Just a few months later, on May 19, 1994, Jackie passed away at the age of 64. For Caroline, losing her mother meant losing the person who had been her greatest source of strength since she was 5 years old. Jackie had helped her survive the unimaginable loss of her father. She had made every major decision about Caroline's upbringing, education, and future. She had worked tirelessly to give both Caroline and John Jr. as normal a childhood as possible, even though they belonged to one of the most famous families in America. Over the years, Caroline often spoke with deep admiration about her mother. She described Jackie as someone who was intelligent, disciplined, and incredibly devoted to her children. Jackie rarely sought sympathy from the public. Instead, she believed that difficult times should be met with quiet determination. Those lessons stayed with Caroline throughout her own life. Jackie also taught Caroline the importance of privacy. Even though reporters constantly wanted access to the Kenedy family, Jackie carefully controlled what the public could see. She believed that not every personal struggle belonged in newspapers or on television. Caroline adopted the same approach as an adult, choosing to keep much of her family life away from public view. By the time Jackie became ill, Caroline had already built a family of her own. She had married designer, writer, and businessman Edwin Schlossberg in 1986. Their wedding took place at the Kenedy family's compound in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, with Jackie proudly watching her daughter begin this new chapter. Together, Caroline and Edwin focused on creating a stable home. They welcomed 3 children: Rose, born in 1988, Tatiana, born in 1990, and John, often called Jack, born in 1993. Caroline wanted her children to experience the same sense of love and security that her mother had worked so hard to provide, despite the family's many tragedies. When Jackie died, Caroline was 36 years old. She was not only grieving as a daughter, but also caring for 3 very young children. She had to balance the demands of motherhood with the emotional weight of losing the person who had always been there to guide her. It was a painful transition, but one she handled with the same quiet strength her mother had shown throughout her own life. Jackie's passing also changed Caroline's place within the Kennedy family. With both of her parents gone, she found herself becoming part of the family's senior generation. Younger relatives naturally looked to her, and she became one of the main guardians of her parents' history and values. Preserving the Kennedy legacy was no longer something Jackie could oversee. That responsibility increasingly rested with Caroline. Just 5 years later, another tragedy would strike the Kennedy family, and this time it would take away the only sibling who truly shared Caroline's childhood memories. The night everything changed. After losing their father as young children and their mother as adults, Caroline Kennedy and her younger brother, John F. Kennedy Jr., shared a connection that very few people could understand. They had experienced the same tragedies, lived under the same public attention, and spent their entire lives carrying the Kennedy name. Through every stage of life, they remained one another's closest link to the childhood they had shared. As they grew older, their lives took different paths, but their bond remained strong. Caroline chose a quieter life centered on family, education, and public service. John Jr., on the other hand, became one of the most recognizable people in America. Ever since the famous image of him saluting his father's casket at the age of 3, the public had watched him grow up. Every new chapter of his life attracted headlines. Handsome, well-educated, and naturally charismatic, John became known as America's most famous political heir, even though he never ran for public office. After earning his law degree, he worked as an attorney before launching George magazine in 1995. The publication combined politics with popular culture and reflected John's belief that politics could reach a wider audience. Although the magazine faced challenges, it showed that he wanted to make his own mark rather than simply live in his father's shadow. John's personal life also captured enormous public interest. In 1996, he married Carolyn Bessette, a fashion publicist who had become well known for her elegance and style. Their wedding was held in complete secrecy on Cumberland Island, Georgia, surprising both reporters and the public. For a brief period, it seemed that John and Carolyn were building a happy future together away from constant media attention. That future ended suddenly on the evening of July 16, 1999. John was piloting his small Piper Saratoga airplane from New Jersey to Martha's Vineyard. Carolyn was traveling with him, along with her older sister, Lauren Bessette. The family planned to attend a Kennedy wedding before continuing on to Hyannisport. Although John had earned his pilot's license and had gained experience flying, the weather that evening included haze that reduced visibility over the Atlantic Ocean. Investigators later concluded that John likely became disoriented while flying in those conditions. The aircraft entered a rapid descent and crashed into the ocean near Martha's Vineyard. There was no distress call, and contact with the plane was lost. As soon as the aircraft was reported missing, an enormous search operation began. The U.S. Coast Guard, Navy, and other rescue teams searched the waters day and night. News networks interrupted regular programming to provide constant updates, and millions of Americans hoped the 3 passengers would somehow be found alive. Newspapers across the country carried front-page stories, and television helicopters followed the search from above. 3 days later, the search ended in heartbreak. Divers located the wreckage on the ocean floor, and the bodies of John, Carolyn, and Lauren were recovered. The discovery confirmed what many had feared from the beginning. For Caroline, the loss was almost impossible to put into words. John was more than her younger brother. He was the only person who truly understood what it had been like to lose their father in childhood and to grow up under endless public attention. Together, they had carried memories that no one else shared. With his death, Caroline became the last surviving child of President John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy. Even after this heartbreaking loss, Caroline refused to let tragedy define her, and she quietly focused on building a life of purpose and service. Building a life. By the time Caroline Kennedy reached her 40s, she had already endured losses that would have changed anyone's life forever. She had lost her father as a child, her mother as an adult, and then her younger brother in one of the most widely covered tragedies of the late 1990s. Yet instead of stepping away from public life completely or becoming known only for her family's history, Caroline chose a different path. She focused on service, education, and preserving the values her parents believed in. Unlike many people born into famous families, Caroline never seemed interested in becoming a celebrity. She rarely gave interviews about her private life, avoided unnecessary media attention, and preferred to let her work speak for itself. While the public remained fascinated with the Kenedy family, Caroline consistently resisted turning that attention into personal fame. One of the ways she did this was by building a career based on meaningful work. After earning her law degree from Columbia Law School, she became an attorney and later worked on a variety of educational and cultural projects. She also wrote and edited several books, many of which focused on American history, constitutional rights, poetry, and civic responsibility. Rather than writing about herself, she chose subjects that reflected her interest in public service and the country's democratic traditions. Caroline also became an important civic leader through her work with the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. The library serves as both a museum and a research center dedicated to preserving the life and presidency of her father. Caroline played an active role in supporting its educational programs and ensuring that new generations could learn about President Kennedy's leadership, his speeches, and his vision for public service. It became one of the main ways she honored his memory without making herself the center of attention. One project especially close to her heart was the Profile in Courage Award. Inspired by her father's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage, the award recognizes public officials who make difficult decisions based on principle rather than political popularity. Caroline helped establish the award in 1989 and has remained deeply involved with it ever since. Every year, she presents the honor to leaders who demonstrate integrity and courage, keeping alive one of the values her father believed mattered most. Her commitment to service eventually led her into diplomacy. In 2013, President Barack Obama appointed Caroline the United States Ambassador to Japan. It was her first official government position, and many observers praised her thoughtful and respectful approach. During her time in Tokyo, she worked to strengthen the long-standing relationship between the United States and Japan while supporting cultural exchanges, educational programs, and security partnerships between the two countries. Years later, she accepted another important diplomatic role. In 2022, President Joe Biden appointed her as the United States Ambassador to Australia. Once again, Caroline represented the United States on the world stage with the same calm and professional style that had become her trademark. Rather than seeking headlines, she focused on strengthening international relationships and carrying out her responsibilities with care. Just when it seemed Caroline had finally found a period of peace, another heartbreaking chapter began with a diagnosis that no parent ever wants to hear: Tatiana Schlossberg's promising life. For Caroline Kenedy, one of her greatest joys was watching her children grow into successful adults with lives of their own. Among them, her younger daughter, Tatiana Schlossberg, stood out for her intelligence, curiosity, and commitment to making a difference. Rather than relying on the Kenedy name, Tatiana built her own career through hard work and thoughtful reporting. Before illness entered her life, her future seemed full of promise. Tatiana was born on May 5, 1990, to Caroline Kenedy and Edwin Schlossberg. Growing up, she experienced a childhood that was far more private than the one her mother had known. Caroline had worked hard to shield her children from the constant media attention that had followed the Kenedy family for decades. As a result, Tatiana was able to focus on school, friendships, and her own interests instead of living in the public spotlight. Education was always an important part of her life. After attending respected schools in New York City, Tatiana went on to study at Yale University. Like her mother, she valued learning and showed an interest in public issues rather than celebrity culture. Friends and classmates often described her as thoughtful, hardworking, and genuinely interested in understanding the world around her. After graduating, Tatiana chose journalism as her profession. She became an environmental reporter, focusing on subjects that many people overlook in everyday life. Rather than chasing breaking news or political drama, she dedicated much of her work to explaining climate change, environmental science, and sustainability in ways that ordinary readers could understand. Her reporting appeared in major publications, including the New York Times, where she covered topics related to energy, climate, and the environment. Tatiana believed that environmental issues affected everyone, regardless of where they lived or what they did for a living. She wanted readers to understand how daily choices could have lasting effects on the planet. Her writing earned respect because it was carefully researched, balanced, and easy to follow. In 2019, she expanded on these ideas by publishing her book, Inconspicuous Consumption: The Environmental Impact You Don't Know You Have. The book explored the hidden environmental costs behind everyday products and modern lifestyles. Instead of criticizing readers, Tatiana encouraged them to become more informed about the world around them. The book was praised for making a complex subject easier for the general public to understand. Outside of her career, Tatiana also found happiness in her personal life. In 2017, she married George Moran, her longtime partner and college sweetheart. Their wedding took place at the Kenedy family's property on Martha's Vineyard, a location filled with generations of family memories. It was a joyful occasion that brought relatives together to celebrate a new beginning. The couple later welcomed 2 children into their family. Their son, Edwin, was born in 2022, followed by their daughter, Josephine, in 2024. Becoming a mother brought another important role into Tatiana's life. Friends and family described her as deeply devoted to her children, balancing the demands of motherhood with her work as a journalist. But only weeks after welcoming her second child, one unexpected medical test would change everything: the illness. For years, Caroline Kenedy had watched her daughter, Tatiana Schlossberg, build a life filled with purpose, love, and promise. Tatiana had a successful career, a happy marriage, and 2 young children. It seemed like she was entering one of the most rewarding periods of her life. Then, without warning, everything changed because of a routine medical test. Shortly after giving birth to her daughter Josephine in 2024, Tatiana underwent standard medical testing. One routine blood test showed that her white blood cell count was unusually high. At first, there was hope that the abnormal result might have a simple explanation connected to childbirth or another temporary condition. Instead, doctors ordered additional tests to find the cause. Those tests delivered devastating news. Tatiana was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, often called AML. This is a fast-growing cancer that begins in the bone marrow and quickly affects the blood. Because the disease progresses rapidly, treatment usually has to begin immediately. For Tatiana and her family, the diagnosis came at a time when they should have been celebrating the arrival of a new baby. Instead, they suddenly found themselves facing hospital visits, difficult medical decisions, and an uncertain future. Doctors began aggressive treatment in an effort to slow the disease. Patients with AML often undergo intensive chemotherapy, and in some cases, bone marrow transplants if they are eligible. The treatments can be physically exhausting and carry serious risks of their own. Although modern medicine has improved survival rates for some patients, AML remains one of the most difficult forms of leukemia to treat, especially when it proves resistant to therapy. Throughout her illness, Tatiana approached her situation with remarkable honesty. Rather than hiding from the reality of what she was facing, she chose to write about it. In November 2025, she published a deeply personal essay in The New Yorker that gave readers an intimate look at life after receiving a terminal diagnosis. The essay was not filled with anger or self-pity. Instead, Tatiana described the everyday realities of living with serious illness while still trying to be a wife and mother. She wrote about wanting to remain present for her young children, even on days when treatment left her exhausted. She explained how she spent time thinking about the memories she hoped her children would carry with them after she was gone. Motherhood remained at the center of her thoughts. Her son, Edwin, was still a toddler, and Josephine was only an infant. Tatiana knew they would grow up with few memories of her, and that reality brought enormous sadness. At the same time, she focused on giving them as much love, comfort, and stability as possible during the time she had left. Sadly, despite everyone's hope and every effort to save her, the hardest goodbye was still waiting just ahead. Caroline Kenedy finally speaks up. After more than a year of fighting acute myeloid leukemia, Tatiana Schlossberg passed away on December 30th, 2025, at the age of 35. Her death marked another heartbreaking chapter for the Kenedy family, a family that had already experienced more than its share of public tragedy. For Caroline Kenedy, it was a loss unlike any she had faced before. She had lived through the deaths of her father, mother, and brother. This time, she was mourning her own child. As with many important moments in the Kennedy family's history, the news was shared through a brief and carefully worded public statement. The announcement, released by the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation on behalf of the family, confirmed Tatiana's passing and honored her memory without revealing unnecessary private details. It simply described her as our beautiful Tatiana and said she would always remain in their hearts. Tatiana's funeral brought together several generations of the Kennedy family and those closest to her. Family members gathered at the Church of St. Ignatius Loyola in New York City to celebrate her life and say their final goodbye. Caroline attended alongside her husband, Edwin Schlossberg, and their surviving children, Rose and Jack. Tatiana's husband, George Moran, was there with their young children, Edwin and Josephine. In the days following Tatiana's death, her younger brother, Jack Schlossberg, shared a heartfelt tribute that quickly received widespread attention. His words were simple but deeply personal. He described his sister as someone who still had so much life ahead of her. He praised her intelligence, humor, kindness, and brilliance, saying she reminded him of both their mother and their father. His message reflected not only the pain of losing a sister, but also the deep admiration he had for the person she had become. Months later, on May 31, 2026, Caroline finally spoke publicly about her daughter during the annual Profile in Courage Award ceremony. The event had long been one of the causes closest to her heart, and despite everything she had endured, she chose to attend. When Tatiana's name came up during her remarks, Caroline did not focus on her daughter's illness or the sadness surrounding her death. Instead, she spoke about Tatiana's life. She remembered her as someone who had represented the values of public service, compassion, and integrity that John and Jacqueline Kennedy had always believed in. She described her daughter's life as beautiful, remarkable, and far too short. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next one.